I found out my parents had quietly put me under a conservatorship in my 20s so they could control my money when I was 36, sitting in a probate courtroom in a navy dress I'd bought on clearance, thinking I was just there to sign a few papers about my grandmother's estate, and the judge looked over his glasses at the file in front of him and said, "Miss Collins, I'll need your conservators present to sign off on any distribution," and I laughed because obviously he'd mixed me up with someone else until he said my parents' names out loud, and my mother, sitting 2 chairs down, went very still in a way I recognized from childhood, like a dog that's about to bite. For a second I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Conservators. That was a Britney Spears word, not a suburban South Carolina accountant's daughter word. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," I said, one hand on the worn leather of my grandmother's purse in my lap like it was a grounding stone. "I don't have a conservator. I'm here on my own." The judge frowned, flipped back a few pages, tapped a section with his pen. "Says here there's been a standing order since 2011, he said. "Conservatorship of the person and estate of one Samantha Collins, petitioners Michael and Carol Collins, granted by this court. Has there been a motion to terminate? I'm not seeing." My father cleared his throat. "Your Honor, that order is mostly a formality," he said, doing that affable, reasonable tone he uses on customers at the car dealership. "Our daughter had some issues when she was younger. We just wanted to make sure she was protected. She's much better now. Much better now." Like I was a broken appliance he'd managed to halfway fix. "I've never been under a conservatorship," I said, my voice climbing higher with each word. "No one told me I was under a conservatorship." The judge's eyebrows shot up. He looked at my parents, then at the attorney handling my grandmother's estate, then back at me. "Why don't we take a brief recess?" he said. "Counsel, please join me in chambers." 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a windowless conference room down the hall with my parents and the estate lawyer, my heart beating so hard it made my fingers tingle. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, tossing the photocopied court order onto the table. It had my name on it in legal type, the case number, the date. I would have been 22. It described me as a young adult with significant mental health challenges, including impaired judgment and an inability to manage finances, which would have been funny if it hadn't been the trap my life had apparently been sitting in for 14 years. "Sam, calm down," my mother said, which only made me see red. "We did this to help you." "You did this without telling me," I said. "I don't remember ever being in court. I don't remember signing anything." "You were in a fragile place," my father said. "After the hospital. You were so overwhelmed. The lawyer said it would be simpler if we just handled things. You agreed." I agreed. I repeated. "When? Before or after you signed away my legal adulthood?" The estate lawyer, a man in his 60s who'd known my grandmother for decades, looked deeply uncomfortable. "I was under the impression you were aware of the arrangement," he said carefully. "It's unusual but not unheard of for parents to maintain conservatorship when there are serious mental health concerns." Serious mental health concerns. My mother echoed like she was reading off a pamphlet. "You tried to drive your car off a bridge, Sam." That's how she always describes it, like it was a dramatic suicide attempt instead of what it actually was. Me, 22, having my first major panic attack on an overpass in the middle of a breakup and a finals week, hyperventilating and pulling onto the shoulder because I thought I was dying, not trying to die. The ER doc had written possible suicidal ideation in the chart because I'd said, "I feel like I'd be better off dead than living like this." And my mother had seized that phrase and wrung it out for every drop of control it gave her. "I had a panic attack," I said now through my teeth. "One time. 12 years ago. I took the meds. I went to therapy. I have not been inpatient since. I've held down a job for 10 years. I pay my rent. I pay my bills. I did not know you had a legal piece of paper that says I can't sign for my own damn inheritance. You've always been impulsive with money," my mother said. "We had to help you after the car accident settlement. Because you convinced me to pay off your second mortgage with it," I snapped. You said it was the Christian thing to do because you gave up your career to raise me. I thought I was being generous. Apparently, I had no legal right to say no. She flinched just a little. We're your parents, she said. We know what's best. We've always taken care of you. This isn't some evil scheme, Samantha. It's a safeguard. The court agreed. The court agreed based on what you told them, I said, stabbing a finger at the order. On the story you painted. Did anyone talk to me? You were represented, my father said. There was a guardian ad litem. You signed the papers. You brought me a stack of forms while I was on Ativan and told me they were insurance stuff. I said slowly, memory unfurling like a bad film. I remember that. I remember my hand shaking so hard you had to hold the clipboard. And we've managed everything since, my mother said, like she was proud of that. Your bank accounts, your taxes, your health insurance. You don't have to worry about those things. That's what parents are for. The estate lawyer cleared his throat. Regardless, he said, professional tone snapping back in place. From the court's perspective, the conservatorship is active, which means any distribution from your grandmother's estate has to be dispersed to your conservators to manage on your behalf. Translation: the money my grandmother had very specifically said should go directly to Samantha, for her security and future, was going to drop into my parents' lap like everything else in my life apparently had. I thought about my grandma then hard, like if I focused enough I could drag her back into that room to say, no, that's not what I meant. She'd been my safe place growing up. When my mother's voice got too sharp and my father got too quiet, Grandma's kitchen was where I went. She'd taught me how to balance a checkbook at 14, how to read the tiny print on credit card offers, how to say, I need to think about that, instead of being pressured into decisions. When I'd had the panic attack in college, she'd been the one to pick me up from the hospital, her soft hand on my knee as she drove, saying, anxiety lies, baby. That's all this is. Lies in your head. You're not crazy. If she'd known my parents had used that one fracture to convince a judge I needed permanent supervision, she would have set the courthouse on fire. How much is it? I asked hoarsely. Grandma's estate. How much are we talking? The lawyer glanced at his folder. After debts and expenses, the estate totals around $220,000, he said. Half is in liquid assets, half is the house, which appraised at, his voice blurred, $220,000. That wasn't lottery money, but it was life-changing for someone like me who'd been living paycheck to paycheck, watching rents climb while my wages barely budged. It was a down payment on a small condo. It was a retirement cushion. It was the option to take a lower-paying job that didn't eat my soul. It was what my grandmother had meant when she told me, a month before she died, I can't leave you much in the way of things, but I can leave you a little piece of breathing room. Promise me you'll use it to build a life that's yours. I looked at my parents. My father's jaw was set. My mother had that look she gets when she's already decided how this conversation will go but is giving me the illusion of choice because it makes her feel righteous. We'll make sure the money is used wisely, she said. We can pay off your student loans, maybe look at getting you into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. I was thinking you could move back home for a while, honestly, and save. There's plenty of room now that Mother's gone. We can fix up the guest room. There it was. The plan. Move back in. Let them manage my inheritance like they'd managed everything else. Become officially the middle-aged child in the spare room, too fragile to be trusted with the checking account. No, I said. My mother blinked. No, she repeated like she'd never heard the word before. No, I said again. My voice shook, but the word felt like a bone finally setting after years of being cracked. I'm not moving back home. I'm not letting you handle Grandma's money. I'm not staying under a conservatorship I didn't understand I was under. My father's eyes narrowed. Be careful what you say, he said. Those papers are legal. You agreed. We can show you your signature. Show me, I said. A week later, in my tiny apartment with the sound of my upstairs neighbor's TV blaring through the ceiling, I spread out everything my new lawyer had pulled from the court archive. There it was, the petition my parents had filed when I was 22, full of phrases like prone to self-harm, and persistent delusional thinking, and incapable of managing basic life tasks. They'd attached my records from that one night, highlighted the nurse's note about suicidal ideation, gotten a letter from our family doctor, who'd seen me exactly twice, in which he said I suffer nervous episodes that interfere with rational judgment. They'd had a hearing date. I'd been listed as present but distressed. I had no memory of sitting in that courtroom, but the transcript said I'd nodded along when the judge asked if I wanted my parents' help. The signature on the final order was mine, shaky from meds and fear, under a line that said respondent acknowledges need for assistance and consents to conservatorship. They lied, I said, voice flat. My lawyer, a woman named Renee with sharp eyes and soft sweaters, shrugged one shoulder. They exaggerated, she said. They used every bad fact and none of the good ones. They painted a worst-case scenario and left out that you passed your classes, held a part-time job, and have not had any further attempts or hospitalizations. They exploited a crisis to get control. Whether you call that lying depends on how charitable you're feeling. I'm not feeling charitable, I said. I'm feeling like someone picked my pocket for 12 years and told me it was for my own good. Then let's get your pockets back, she said. It was not as simple as just asking the court to undo it. Conservatorship are easier to put in place than to remove, as every news story about famous people in similar situations has taught us. We had to petition for termination, submit my current medical and employment records, line up my therapist to testify that I'd been stable for years, that my anxiety and depression were managed, that I was perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. My parents fought it, of course. We're just trying to protect her, my mother said in her affidavit, which we got a copy of as part of discovery. She has always been fragile. She gets overwhelmed easily. She forgets things. She's impulsive with money. We're not doing this for ourselves. God knows we don't need the stress. We're doing it because we love her. She listed every bad decision I'd ever made. Every bounce check from when I was 20, every time I'd called her crying over a breakup, the one fender bender I'd had in the rain, as evidence of my incompetence. She didn't mention the 2 promotions I'd gotten at work, the balanced budgets in my bullet journal, the fact that I'd been the one handling grandma's medications and appointments the last year of her life because my parents couldn't stand to see her like that. In their version of the story, I was perpetually one bad day away from driving off that bridge for real. In my version, they were terrified of losing control. The hearing date arrived. The same judge who'd approved the conservatorship happened to be on the bench. He looked older, grayer. So was I. In the hallway outside the courtroom, my mother clutched her Bible like a talisman. My father refused to look at me. You don't have to do this, my mother said in a low voice. We can work this out as a family. You're hauling us into court like criminals. Is that really what you want people to see? I didn't put you on any docket, I said. You put me here 12 years ago. I'm just showing up this time. Inside, everything was clinical and slow. My lawyer made our case. She submitted my pay stubs, my lease, letters from my boss, and my therapist. She pointed out that I'd never been arrested, never defaulted on a debt, never been rehospitalized. The only red mark on my adult record was a piece of paper saying I couldn't legally sign my own tax return. My parents' lawyer painted a different picture. He leaned heavily on the panic attack, on my history of depressive episodes, on my social isolation, conveniently ignoring that a lot of that isolation was because my parents had told everyone in our church small group that I was sick and couldn't handle stress, so people stopped inviting me to things. He argued that the conservatorship had worked. I hadn't had any serious crises since, so clearly my parents' management was necessary. That was the twisted logic of it. The better I did, the more proof they claimed it was because they were in charge. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, knees shaking, and told the judge about my life. I told him about budgeting every paycheck to the penny, about taking grandma to her appointments, about handling open enrollment forms at work without having to call my mother to decipher them. I told him about the panic attack, the one that had been turned into my entire personality, and how it had felt, how I'd learned to recognize the early warning signs and manage them. I told him about the way my mother still called me every night at 9:30 on the dot to make sure you took your meds, even though I'd been managing my prescriptions with a pill organizer for a decade. I told him about the time I tried to sign up for a 401k and been told my guardian had to approve the investment choices, a conversation that had confused the HR rep because she'd thought I was joking. I didn't tell him about crying in my car after that, feeling like a child in an adult costume. I told him about Grandma, how she'd sat in her recliner a month before she died, hands folded over the Afghan I'd knit her, and said, "Your parents and I don't always see eye to eye, but I know you, Samantha. You're steady. You're kind. You're a better adult than you think. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I said, "She left this money to me, not to my parents, to me. And I feel like I'm standing here asking permission to be the person she already thought I was." When my parents took the stand, my mother cried. A lot. She talked about holding me as a newborn, about how I'd been a colicky baby, about how she'd always known I was sensitive. She talked about the night of the panic attack like it was yesterday, how the police had called, how she'd found me shaking in the ER, how the doctor had mentioned major depressive disorder, and how the word suicidal had branded itself on her brain. "I can't lose my child," she said, tears streaming. "If that means I have to be the bad guy sometimes, if that means she hates me for a little while, I can live with that. I'd rather she hate me and be alive than love me and be dead." It was a hell of a speech. I almost believed her myself. Then Renee asked her one question that sliced through it. "Mrs. Collins," she said, her voice gentle but pointed, "in the 12 years since the conservatorship was granted, have you used any of Samantha's funds for your own expenses?" My mother blinked. "We've paid her bills," she said. "We've managed her accounts." "That's not what I asked," Renee said. "Have you used any of the money in accounts held in Samantha's name to pay for things not directly related to her care? For example, your second mortgage, your car payments, household renovations?" My mother's mouth tightened. "We are a family," she said. "We don't keep score like that. Money is communal." "So that's a yes," Renee said. My father jumped in, bristling. "We have done nothing but support our daughter," he said. "We took care of her settlement after the accident. We made sure it didn't get blown on foolishness. Yes, some of it went to the house. It's her home too. She lived there." "Does she own any portion of the house?" Renee asked. "Is her name on the deed?" "No," my father said. "The deed is in our names. That's how mortgages work." "So Samantha's money increased the equity in an asset she has no legal claim to," Renee said. "And now you want control over another $220,000 she stands to inherit. Can you see why someone might question your motives, even if we grant that you started with good intentions?" My mother glared. "We are not thieves," she said. "We are parents. Samantha is painting us as monsters because she doesn't like being told no." My brother, Mark, who'd flown in for the hearing and had been sitting behind our parents, nodded along. "She's always been dramatic," he muttered loudly enough for the court reporter to catch. It wasn't about him, but like everything else in our family, he found a way to make it orbit him. After hours of testimony and legal arguments, the judge took a recess. When he came back, he looked tired. "This is not an easy case," he said. "Conservatorship are serious matters. They're meant to protect vulnerable people, not to control them indefinitely. At the time this order was granted, Miss Collins was in a crisis. The court relied on the information presented by her parents and her physician. Whether that information was incomplete or slanted is, at this distance, hard to parse. What is clear to me today is that Miss Collins has demonstrated sustained stability, employment, and the ability to manage her own affairs. The law presumes adults are competent unless proven otherwise. I see no ongoing proof." My stomach did a slow somersault. "Therefore," he said, I am terminating the conservatorship effective immediately. All assets held on Ms. Collins's behalf, including any remaining funds from prior settlements and any inheritance from the estate currently in probate, are to be transferred into accounts solely in her name. Mr. and Mrs. Collins will provide a full accounting of their management of her finances within 60 days. My mother gasped. My father went red. Your Honor, that's a lot of paperwork, he sputtered. The records are old. I don't know if we have every statement. Then you can work with the banks to reconstruct them, the judge said. You undertook the responsibility when you asked for control. That responsibility includes transparency. He turned to me. Miss Collins, I hope you'll consider family counseling, he said. These situations are fraught, but you are legally an adult in full control of your person and estate. Use that freedom wisely. Outside the courtroom, my mother rounded on me in the hallway, eyes blazing. Are you satisfied? She hissed. You've publicly shamed us. You've made us look like thieves. People from church were here. They heard every word. I told the truth, I said. If the truth makes you look bad, that's not my fault. You are ungrateful, she said. We saved you from yourself. We raised you. We paid for everything. You pay us back by dragging us into court over money. This isn't just about money, I said. It's about you having the legal right to decide where I live, and when I can date and whether I can quit my job or buy a car. It's about you reading my medical records and changing my meds because you don't like the side effects. It's about you telling my boss I was too stressed for a promotion behind my back. She blinked. How did you? She told me, I said. She assumed I knew because what kind of parent would do that without telling their kid? For once, my mother had no comeback. She just stared at me like I was a stranger. You'll regret this, she said finally, and walked away on stiff legs. The accounting they eventually provided was incomplete, to put it kindly. There were gaps. There were checks from my accident settlement written to cash. There were transfers labeled household, church tithe, emergency loan to Mark that had never been repaid. Renee laid it all out in a spreadsheet. We could sue, she said. We could pursue a surcharge. A judge might order them to repay some of this. But it would take years, and they don't appear to have the assets to make you whole. I stared at the numbers. $50,000 from the settlement. $10,000 from a college fund my grandparents had started and my parents had redirected when I decided not to go to grad school. God knew how much tithe, how much vanished into my brother's failed businesses. So it's gone, I said. Most of it, she said. You can spend the next 5 years trying to squeeze blood from a stone, or you can chalk it up as the price of your freedom and move forward. I chose freedom. Not because I'm above wanting the money back. I'm still angry when I think about what that $50,000 could have done for me, but because every interaction with my parents by that point felt like scraping my nerves with sandpaper. I couldn't imagine spending years in court filing motions against them. Instead, I took my share of Grandma's estate when the probate finally closed. The house was sold. After realtor fees and taxes, my portion was smaller than the big number I'd heard in that first shocked meeting, but it was mine. I opened my own bank account for real this time with just my name on it. I met with a financial planner. I cried in their office because I was so used to apologizing for every purchase that the idea of consciously choosing where my money went felt like a moral failing. You're not doing anything wrong by existing, the planner said gently. You're allowed to build a life. I moved to a slightly better apartment in a part of town where my car was less likely to get broken into. I cut my hours a little at the job I hated and found a part-time gig. I loved tutoring community college students. I bought a couch that wasn't a hand-me-down. Small things that felt enormous because I'd made them happen. My parents did not take the new reality well. My mother called constantly at first, leaving voicemails asking if I'd taken my pills, reminding me to pay my power bill, warning me that real-world responsibilities are hard. When I stopped answering every call, she shifted tactics. She posted vague things on Facebook about children who forget who wiped their noses and the wicked generation that puts money over family. She told people at church that I had turned on them and accused them of stealing when all they'd ever done was sacrifice. Some relatives bought it. My Aunt Linda cornered me at a grocery store and hissed, "Your parents are devastated. How could you drag them into court like that? They're old. They were just trying to help. Did they tell you they had power of attorney over my entire life?" I asked. "Did they mention the part where they spent my accident settlement on a new roof?" She pursed her lips. "Money comes and goes," she said. "Family is forever." I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. My brother texted me once. "Nice job nuking mom and dad's reputation. Hope grandma's blood money keeps you warm." I blocked his number. It's been 3 years now. Things have settled in their way. My parents and I are low contact. I see them on major holidays if there's a neutral venue and other people around. We do surface-level small talk about the weather and my cousin's kids and the pastor's latest sermon. We do not talk about the conservatorship, the money, or the hearing. My mother still sometimes slips and says things like, "Did you remember to pay your rent?" And I remind her as gently as I can that it's not her business. She flinches like I slapped her. My father takes any mention of finances as a personal attack, so I avoid it. My grandmother's purse sits on a shelf by my front door. Inside is the little spiral notebook where she wrote her grocery lists, with numbers in the margins where she tracked her spending. On the last page in shaky script is a note. "Sam, remember, money is a tool, not a chain. Love, Grandma." I read it every time I feel myself slipping back into the old mindset that I'm irresponsible, that I don't deserve autonomy, that my parents were right to wrap me in legal bubble wrap and call it love. Because here's the thing, I don't doubt that they love me in their way. I think my mother really did lie awake nights after that panic attack, terrified she'd find me dead. I think my father really did worry that I'd sign up for some scammy credit card and ruin my credit. I think they thought they were doing the right thing, at least at first. But somewhere along the line, protecting me became controlling me. Somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing me as a person growing and started seeing me as a permanent threat to myself. And somewhere along the line, the convenience of having access to my money blurred the line between helping and helping themselves. I still wrestle with guilt. Some nights I lie in bed and hear my mother's voice in my head saying, "You chose money over family." And I wonder if that's what everyone thinks. That I'm the selfish daughter who couldn't just let her parents manage things quietly. That I humiliated them in court for a payout. Other nights I remember sitting in that courtroom, heart pounding, asking a stranger in a robe to please treat me like an adult. And I know that even if Grandma had died penniless, I would have needed to do it. Because it wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about my name on my own life. So that's my story, internet strangers. I'm the daughter who had one bad mental health crisis in college, whose parents used that crisis to convince a judge she needed a conservatorship for her own good, who spent 12 years not knowing she was legally considered incapable of managing her own affairs, who found out only when her grandmother died and left her an inheritance that would have dropped neatly into her parents' hands, and who chose to fight the conservatorship in court, exposing years of financial management that drained her settlement and savings, knowing it would probably blow up what was left of her relationship with her parents. They say I betrayed them, shamed them publicly, and cared more about Grandma's money than about family loyalty. I say they crossed the line when they turned my worst day into a permanent excuse to run my life and treat my bank account like a family fund. But I still lie awake some nights wondering if I was too harsh, if I should have tried to work it out quietly, if dragging them into court in their 60s was a step too far, no matter what they'd done. If you were in my shoes, if you discovered your parents had secretly put you under a conservatorship in your 20s, used it for years to control your money and then stood ready to take your entire inheritance when your one safe relative died, would you have done what I did and gone to court to end it and force an accounting, even knowing it would shatter your parents' image and probably your relationship with them? Or would you have kept the peace, let them stay in charge for your own good, and hope they do right by you in the end because that's what family is supposed to do?